Kextool's 6 fingers were racing across the holographic interface with practiced efficiency when the first red warning light began to flash. At first, she dismissed it as another routine alert, perhaps an outdated certification or an administrative override requiring attention. After all, as junior administrator of the Vorak filing system, she encountered dozens of minor procedural hiccups every cycle. But this was different. The screen flashed an ominous crimson that she had never seen before, casting eerie shadows across her normally serene workstation. "Protocol 77 Alpha," she read aloud, her voice faltering. The terminal emitted a series of escalating beeps, followed by a system-wide message that sent a chill through her spine. "Combat readiness triggered." Kextool froze, her 6 fingers hovering uncertainly above the controls. The Galactic High Command had unified over 300 civilizations under a peaceful council system for thousands of years. The Vorak filing system and Protocol 77 Alpha were implemented across the Alliance specifically to ensure no signs of combat ever entered the Council chambers. War had become a distant memory, relegated to historical archives and academic discussions. So why was the system triggering a combat alert now? "Bellinara!" she called out, her voice carrying across the administrative hub. "Something's wrong with the system!" Senior Administrator Bellinara approached with the calm confidence that came from centuries of administrative experience. A member of a predatory species that had once conquered vast swaths of the galaxy before joining the Alliance. She carried herself with the composed dignity of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. "What seems to be the problem?" Bellinara asked, leaning over Kextool's station. When she saw the flashing red alert, her normally impassive features tightened with concern. "Protocol 77 Alpha, that's impossible. The system has invalidated all approved meeting schedules for the next 60 cycles, Kextool explained, pointing to the scrolling data. "Everything's been locked down." Bellinara's eyes narrowed as she examined the notification. "What triggered it?" Kextool navigated through several screens, pulling up the flag document. "It appears to be from the Earth Representative's Equipment Manifest. Just one line triggered it. Item 77L, Combat Boots, Terran Defense Force Standard Issue." "Combat boots?" Bellinara echoed incredulously. "The system shut down the entire schedule because of footwear?" Kextool nodded, equally confused. "There are no weapons listed, no combat drones, no tactical systems, just boots." They stared at the screen in stunned silence. The greatest diplomatic crisis in a millennium had just been triggered by a pair of shoes. Kextool attempted an emergency override, her fingers dancing across the interface with increasing desperation. "It's not accepting any modifications. The system is locked in security assessment mode until the combat readiness is verified." Bellinara was simultaneously contacting the Zerian Naval Command, the Crystalline Assembly, and the Hivemind Collective to cross-check the error. One by one, the reports came back with the same result. Protocol 77 Alpha, triggered across all systems. "This is unprecedented," Bellinara said, her voice tight with concern. "The last time Protocol 77 Alpha was invoked was during the Black Matter Shield crisis, and that involved actual weapons." The communications panel chimed. "Security here? The Earth representative has arrived in the waiting area." Kextool and Bellinara exchanged alarmed glances. According to procedure, they couldn't refuse to receive guests who had physically arrived, even if their scheduled meetings had been invalidated. "Send him to Reception Room 3, Bellinara instructed after a moment's hesitation. "We'll handle this personally." When Attaché Reynolds entered the room, both administrators were struck by how ordinary he appeared, of average human height and build. He wore a standard diplomatic uniform with the only notable difference being the black combat boots on his feet, still bearing faint traces of dust from some distant battlefield. He stepped into the waiting room completely unaware that he was causing a galaxy-wide crisis. Good day. He greeted them with a polite nod. I submitted my credentials 3 cycles ago, including my military rank, diplomatic certification, and equipment manifest with standard uniform and boots. I was wondering if my meeting schedule has been approved. Bellinara attempted to explain the situation delicately. We're currently reviewing your file because it contains a reference to combat boots, Terran Defense Force. Our system has automatically flagged this as a potential indication of imminent conflict. Reynolds looked bewildered. They're just standard-issue footwear. I've worn them to numerous diplomatic engagements without issue. Interesting, Bellinara said. Her curiosity piqued. Have you participated in many interspecies negotiations wearing these exact boots? Yes, quite a few, Reynolds confirmed. The Rigelian Trade Compact, the dispute with the Centauri colonies. Kextool was already pulling up those files, and what she discovered was startling. Every negotiation in which Attaché Reynolds had participated, with those very boots on his feet, had concluded with remarkable speed. The Rigelian Trade Compact, originally scheduled for 6 months of deliberation, had been finalized in just 3 weeks. The territorial dispute with the Centauri colonies, expected to drag on for years, had been settled in a single session. This is bizarre, Kextool whispered to Bellinara. Every species seems to have established their own version of Protocol 77 Alpha, immediately after contact with humans. Bellinara nodded slowly, her mind racing. We need to consult the Xenoarchaeology Institute. There must be some historical connection between combat boots and humans that's triggering this response across the Alliance. While Reynolds waited patiently in the reception area, Kextool established a secure connection to the Xenoarchaeology Institute, where Dr. Velterin, the leading xenoarchaeologist in the Alliance, was already analyzing the unusual request. Combat boots, you say? The elderly scientist's holographic projection flickered slightly as she stroked her chin thoughtfully. My team will examine our archives immediately. Dr. Velterin and her assistants, Pipsor, a Zephyrin with exceptional analytical skills, and Kilt, an insectoid researcher specializing in tactical artifact analysis, began sifting through thousands of historical samples. We have footwear artifacts from human battlefields dating back to their Bronze Age, Pipsor reported, displaying a 3-dimensional projection of various boot fragments, organized chronologically. Through every layer of archaeological strata, boot remnants appear precisely at the defensive lines of Earth armies, Kilt added. The boots were manufactured to withstand force, insulate from electricity, provide light ballistic protection, all for combat purposes. The concentration at frontline positions suggests boots weren't merely protective, Pipsor observed. They formed a psychological defense line, a visual signal to opponents that humans were combat-ready. Dr. Velterin's expression grew increasingly troubled as she reviewed the findings. What's most peculiar is that each civilization, Vorak, Zarian, Crystalline, Hivemind, Regalian, developed a protocol similar to Protocol 77 Alpha independently, all using the same code 77 and the same combat readiness threshold. Is there a common denominator? Bellinara asked. There must be, Dr. Velterin replied. Perhaps each species observed humans wearing boots during negotiations and independently developed similar protocols. But strangely, they never discussed these protocols with each other. Yet they're nearly identical in content. As Kextool and Bellinara received Dr. Velterin's report, their concern deepened. If humans wearing boots are automatically classified as a war threat, but the humans themselves have no aggressive intentions, we're facing a potential catastrophe, Kextool said. If other civilizations react defensively to this perceived threat, an unnecessary conflict could erupt. We need to report this to Commander Thexel immediately, Bellinara decided, referring to the veteran commander who had navigated the Alliance through 11 galactic crises, including confrontations with sentient black holes. The emergency council chamber of the High Command was a marvel of engineering, decorated with synthetic diamonds that refracted light in patterns that shifted with the heartbeats of the officials present. Around a circular table of polished obsidian sat the galaxy's most influential leaders. Commander Thexil presided with the gravitas of someone who had stared down extinction multiple times. Quexath, the crystalline representative, glittered with sharp angles and metallic reflections. Mun, from the Hivemind Collective, appeared as an intricate biological network that connected multiple consciousnesses. Raytar, the Regalian military commander, sat with the coiled tension of an apex predator. Displayed on floating screens were the real-time reports from Kextool, Bellinara, and Dr. Velterin. Protocol 77 Alpha was triggered by Attaché Reynolds' combat boots, Kextool explained. Cross-checking across all departments yielded the same error. Dr. Velterin presented her archaeological data. Throughout 6,000 years of Earth history, combat boots appear in every conflict. Humans don't distinguish between wearing boots and wearing regular shoes. They consider boots everyday attire. Mun, the Hivemind representative, added, "Human thought systems integrate warfare into daily life. Their children play war games from an early age and enjoy combat simulations for entertainment. To them, combat boots aren't unusual at all." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. A recording of previous negotiations between Attaché Reynolds and the Regalian Trade Council was replayed. The subtle shift in the Regalian representative's body language when they noticed Reynolds' boots was now obvious. They had hastily agreed to terms they might otherwise have disputed, believing Earth was preparing for military action. If a species wears boots and behaves as though they're already on a battlefield, how can we distinguish between a real threat and a cultural misunderstanding? Raytar asked, his claws tapping nervously on the table. If we continue allowing Earth representatives to wear boots into council chambers, Protocol 77 Alpha will automatically expel them, blocking all diplomatic channels. Quexath pointed out. Commander Thexil had remained silent, his weathered features revealing nothing of his internal struggle. He questioned whether they had become too dependent on automated protocols, forgetting their responsibility to communicate with those who were different. He was torn between maintaining the Alliance's security framework and acknowledging the innocence of the human representative. If he canceled the meetings, critical policy decisions would be delayed. If he allowed Reynolds to enter, it might trigger a crisis. Neither option seemed ideal. Finally, he spoke. "We will temporarily postpone all meetings until we can properly decode the true significance of combat boots in human culture." The representatives agreed, unwilling to risk interspecies conflict when humans displayed what they perceived as signs of combat readiness. Attaché Reynolds received notification of the delay, informed only that additional review of submitted materials is required. He remained unaware of the controversy surrounding his footwear. Meanwhile, Dr. Velterin's team continued their investigation, delving deeper into ancient archives. "We've analyzed boot fragments from the Battle of Hastings," Kilt reported. "The basic design, leather construction, metal reinforcement, waterproof lining, has remained remarkably consistent over 6,000 years. Humans don't view boots as weapons," Pipsor concluded. "But every other species uses boots as a signal of impending conflict." The team discovered another peculiarity as they examined historical reconstruction patterns. After each victory, humans rebuilt and upgraded infrastructure in territories they conquered, Pipsor noted. "They fought to reconstruct, not to destroy," Kilt added. "What's unusual is that after conflicts, they didn't return to normal, peaceful conditions. They improved living standards for the population. That's rare behavior among conquering species." This presented the Council with a paradox, a species that always appeared combat-ready. Yet, when they actually fought, they improved society rather than devastating it. The second emergency session in the High Command's Alpha-level security chamber was charged with tension. Psychic dampening systems hummed in the background, and the subdued lighting pulsed with a low bass frequency whenever anyone's stress levels spiked. The galactic leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the alert system flashed. Combat indicator. Human representative altered equipment configuration. They had just received word that Attaché Reynolds had changed from his combat boots to civilian loafers to rest his feet. The Council's reaction was immediate and severe. Switching from combat boots to civilian loafers is a coded message, Quexath declared, crystal facets flashing with agitation. They're trying to misdirect us. It's a feint retreat strategy before launching a close-quarters attack. Raytar agreed vehemently. Only someone preparing for a sneak attack would reduce their equipment profile in front of an adversary. Mun's collective consciousness rippled with analysis. There is no precedent for any species voluntarily downgrading their equipment while conflict risk remains. This behavior indicates the highest level of deception. Security departments activated the Tactical Assessment Subroutine version Omega, running 3,000 parallel algorithms to determine the human's true intentions. Time seemed to slow, as each second brought thousands of data sequences cascading through the system. Commander Thexel wondered silently if this was the most sophisticated psychological warfare they had ever encountered. If they continued to delay, the entire alliance would grind to a halt. If they allowed Reynolds in, were they risking catastrophe? A video connection was established with Attaché Reynolds. "Can you explain why you changed your footwear just now?" the coordinator asked carefully. Reynolds looked perplexed. "Oh, I just changed shoes because my feet were hurting. The combat boots are a bit tight. These loafers are much more comfortable." Silence fell over the council chamber. Every eye focused on the screen, analyzing Reynolds' facial expressions for signs of deception. 10 excruciating seconds passed before Reynolds casually asked, "What about my meeting schedule?" Commander Thexel swallowed hard, realizing the absurdity of the situation. An entire system of over 300 civilizations had collectively misinterpreted a simple shoe change as a war strategy. All their resistance had been meaningless. Quexath slammed a crystalline appendage on the table. "If it's just for comfort, we've wasted thousands of hours of analysis." Commander Thexel stood up, his voice solemn. "From now on, the High Command will not delay meetings if Earth representatives wear only casual footwear. We will update our protocol. Civilian footwear, formal shoes, loafers, will receive immediate approval. Combat boots will trigger standard security assessment delays." The council chamber erupted in relieved murmurs. The Battle of Tebut was officially over. With the meetings back on schedule, Attaché Reynolds entered the council chamber for the third time, now wearing his comfortable loafers. Initially, awkward glances gradually transformed into enthusiastic engagement as the tension dissipated. This particular session proceeded with unprecedented efficiency. Trade agreements and resource distribution treaties were finalized in a single session, breaking all records for galactic diplomacy. The Regalians, initially still wary, couldn't help but chuckle at the resolution. So, all it takes is for humans to wear loafers for us to feel safe. The Crystalline Assembly posed a research question. Could other civilizations learn to trust humans more readily? Or have we simply circumvented an extreme system with a pair of shoes? The Hivemind Collective transmitted a collective response to Commander Thexel. "Henceforth, we will add a footwear variable to our human assessment algorithms." After the meeting, Reynolds chatted with a fellow Earth diplomat. "Do you know why they seemed so surprised?" His colleague laughed. "Somehow, you changed your shoes to ease your feet and threw the entire galaxy into chaos." Reynolds smiled. "Well, that's good to know. Apparently, the fastest way to negotiate is to take off your boots." Dr. Velterin and her team realized that boots weren't merely physical objects. They played psychological and historical roles. Earth humans have elevated stability through humor to an art form, she mused. One small detail, a pair of shoes, caused hundreds of species to stop and question themselves. The High Command issued a universal footwear directive. If Earth representatives wore combat boots, meetings would be automatically delayed for security assessment, because they might be in combat mode. If Earth representatives wore casual or formal footwear, meetings would proceed immediately with priority processing, because this was considered a safety signal. The story concludes as the camera pans across the courtyard of the Vorak building, where a young Vorak child plays with a robot model while wearing toy combat boots. A system warning light begins to flash ominously in the background, suggesting that the comedy, or tragedy, would continue. Junior Administrator Kextool had always prided herself on efficiency. 6 fingers were better than 5, after all, and the Vorak filing system was the most sophisticated bureaucratic mechanism in the known galaxy. For over 3,000 years, it had processed every diplomatic meeting, every trade agreement, and every security protocol without a single error. Until today. The crimson alert on her screen pulsed with unmistakable urgency. Protocol 77 Alpha. The designation alone made her inner eyelids flutter with anxiety. This was the highest security alert in the entire Galactic High Command system, designed to prevent armed conflict from entering the sacred halls of interplanetary diplomacy. Senior Administrator, Kextool's voice wavered slightly as she called across the transparent metallic chamber. Through the walls, she could see the glittering young star cluster that served as the backdrop for the Vorak administrative station. The vista usually calmed her, but not today. Bellinara approached with measured steps, her predatory ancestry evident in her fluid movements. As a senior administrator with centuries of experience, she had witnessed the rise and fall of minor star empires. Yet the puzzlement in her eyes was unmistakable as she gazed at the flashing screen. Protocol 77 Alpha has invalidated all approved meetings for the next 60 cycles, Kextool explained, her 6 fingers hovering anxiously over the interface. The system is showing combat readiness triggered. Bellinara's facial ridges furrowed. That's impossible. The Galactic High Command hasn't detected combat readiness in over 700 years. It's coming from the Earth Representative's Equipment Manifest, Kextool said, navigating through several security screens. Specifically this entry, Item 77L, Combat Boots, Terran Defense Force Standard Issue. They stared at each other in bewilderment. A pair of boots, mere footwear, had just thrown the entire galactic diplomatic schedule into chaos. "Override it," Bellinara commanded. "I've tried," Kextool replied, demonstrating a series of administrative commands that all returned the same error message. Security protocol active. Override denied. Bellinara immediately contacted the Zarian Naval Command, the Crystalline Assembly, and the Hivemind Collective to cross-check the anomaly. Each reported the same issue. Protocol 77 Alpha had been triggered across all systems. As they grappled with this unprecedented situation, the security officer's voice came through the communication panel. "The Earth representative has arrived at the reception area." Kextool's inner eyelids fluttered again. "What do we do? We can't refuse entry according to Visitation Protocol 12B, but all meetings have been invalidated by Protocol 77 Alpha." Bellinara hesitated only briefly. "Direct him to Reception Room 3. We'll handle this personally." When Attaché Reynolds entered, both administrators were struck by his utterly unremarkable appearance. He was of average human height, with the calm demeanor typical of experienced diplomats. His formal diplomatic uniform was impeccable, except for the black combat boots still bearing faint traces of dust, presumably from some Earth terrain. "Good morning," he greeted them pleasantly. "I submitted my credentials 3 cycles ago, including my military rank verification, diplomatic certification, and equipment manifest with standard uniform and regulation boots. I was wondering if my meeting schedule has been approved. Bellinara attempted to maintain professional composure. We're currently reviewing your submission because there's an item in your equipment manifest, combat boots, Terran Defense Force, that has triggered our Protocol 77 Alpha. The system has categorized this as a potential indicator of imminent conflict. Reynolds looked genuinely confused. These are just standard issue footwear. I've worn them to numerous diplomatic engagements throughout the galaxy, and there's never been an issue before. This statement piqued Bellinara's curiosity. You've participated in other negotiations wearing these exact boots? Of course, Reynolds replied. The Regelian Trade Compact, the Centauri Colonies dispute, the Arcturus Mining Rights Agreement, all while wearing these boots. Kextool was already pulling up these diplomatic records, and what she discovered was astonishing. Every negotiation that Attaché Reynolds had participated in, with those very boots on his feet, had concluded with unprecedented speed. The Regelian Trade Compact, originally scheduled for 6 months of deliberations, had been finalized in just 3 weeks. The territorial dispute with the Centauri colonies, expected to last years, had been settled in a single session. Look at this, she whispered to Bellinara. Each species seems to have established their own equivalent to Protocol 77 Alpha immediately after their first contact with humans. But they never shared this information with each other. Bellinara's expression grew increasingly troubled. We need to consult the Xenoarchaeology Institute. There must be some historical connection between combat boots and human warfare that's triggering this synchronized response across the Alliance. While Reynolds waited patiently, Kextool established a secure connection to Dr. Velterin at the Xenoarchaeology Institute, where a team of specialists immediately began examining thousands of years of human military history. The prevalence of boots in human warfare is remarkable, Dr. Velterin reported after several hours of intensive research. Her holographic projection displayed a timeline of boot fragments recovered from Earth battlefields spanning millennia. From their Bronze Age empires to their industrial war fortifications, combat boots appear consistently at defensive positions. Pipsor, her Zephyrin assistant, added, the boots were engineered for durability, with reinforced soles, water resistance, and occasionally limited ballistic protection. They were clearly designed for combat environments. Kilt, the insectoid researcher, observed. The concentration of boot fragments along frontline positions suggests they weren't merely functional. They formed a psychological defensive line, a visual signal to opponents that humans were prepared for combat. Dr. Velterin's expression grew increasingly concerned. What's truly extraordinary is that each major civilization in our alliance, Vorak, Zarian, Crystalline, Hivemind, Regalian, independently developed protocols similar to your Protocol 77 Alpha, all using remarkably similar detection parameters. They never coordinated these security measures, yet they're nearly identical in implementation. Could there be a common trigger? Bellinara asked. There must be, Dr. Velterin confirmed. I hypothesize that each species observed humans wearing boots during negotiations and independently developed similar security protocols in response. But why would they all reach the same conclusion without consultation? And why would they all use variants of the designation 77? As the implications of this discovery became clear, Kextool and Bellinara's concern deepened. If humans wearing boots are automatically classified as a war threat by every major civilization, but the humans themselves have no aggressive intentions, we're facing a potentially catastrophic miscommunication, Bellinara said. If even 1 or 2 civilizations react defensively to this perceived threat, it could trigger an actual conflict. We need to report this to Commander Thexil immediately, Kextool decided, referring to the veteran commander who had navigated the Alliance through 11 major galactic crises including the black matter shield incident and the confrontation with a sentient black hole. The Emergency Council chamber of the High Command was an architectural marvel of security and diplomacy. Synthetic diamonds lined the walls, refracting light in patterns that subtly shifted with the heartbeats of the officials present. Around a massive obsidian table sat the most influential leaders in the galaxy. Commander Thexel presided with the quiet authority of someone who had faced extinction multiple times and prevailed. Quexath, the representative of the crystalline assembly, gleamed with sharp angles and metallic reflections that betrayed no emotion. Mun from the Hivemind Collective appeared as an intricate biological network connecting multiple consciousnesses into a single entity. Raytar, the Regalian military commander, maintained the tightly coiled posture of an apex predator, always ready to strike. Displayed on floating holographic screens were the real-time reports from Kextool, Bellinara, and Dr. Velteran's team. Protocol 77 Alpha was triggered by a single item in Attaché Reynolds' equipment manifest, his combat boots. Kextool explained. Cross-checking across all departments yielded the same error response in every system. Dr. Velteran presented her archaeological findings. Throughout 6,000 years of Earth history, combat boots appear consistently in every major conflict. What's crucial to understand is that humans don't make the same distinction we do between wearing boots and wearing regular shoes. To them, boots are simply everyday attire, often chosen for comfort and durability, rather than as a signal of combat readiness. Mun, the Hivemind representative, added insight from their collective analysis of human psychology. Human thought systems integrate warfare concepts into daily life in ways most species find disturbing. Their children play war games from an early age. Their entertainment often simulates combat scenarios, and their everyday language is filled with military metaphors. To them, combat boots aren't an unusual or threatening choice of footwear. The council members exchanged uneasy glances as a recording of previous negotiations between Attaché Reynolds and the Regalian Trade Council was displayed. The subtle shift in the Regalian representative's body language when they noticed Reynolds' boots was now obvious. They had hastily agreed to terms they might otherwise have disputed, clearly believing Earth was preparing for military action if negotiations failed. If a species wears combat-ready attire and behaves as though they're already on a battlefield, how can we distinguish between a real threat and a cultural misunderstanding? Raytar asked, his claws tapping nervously on the obsidian surface. If we continue allowing Earth representatives to wear boots into council chambers, Protocol 77 Alpha will automatically expel them, effectively blocking all diplomatic channels. Quexath pointed out, crystalline structures glinting with concern. Commander Thexel had remained silent throughout the discussion, his weathered features revealing nothing of his internal struggle. He questioned whether they had become too dependent on automated protocols, forgetting their responsibility to communicate with those who were different from themselves. He was torn between maintaining the Alliance's security framework and acknowledging the innocence of the human representative. If he canceled the meetings, critical policy decisions would be delayed indefinitely. If he allowed Reynolds to enter with his boots, it might trigger a wider crisis. Neither option seemed ideal. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of countless difficult decisions. We will temporarily postpone all meetings until we can properly decode the true significance of combat boots in human culture and military history. The representatives reluctantly agreed, unwilling to risk interspecies conflict when humans displayed what they perceived as clear signs of combat readiness. Attaché Reynolds received a diplomatic notification informing him that his meetings would be delayed due to additional review of submitted materials. He remained completely unaware that his choice of footwear had thrown the entire galactic diplomatic corps into crisis. Meanwhile, Dr. Velteran and her team continued their investigation. delving deeper into ancient archives and analyzing fragments of footwear recovered from thousands of archaeological sites across Earth's history. We've analyzed boot fragments from the Battle of Hastings and compared them with contemporary military footwear, Kilt reported. The basic design elements, leather construction, metal reinforcement, waterproof lining, have remained remarkably consistent over 6,000 years of human history. Our conclusion is that humans don't view boots as weapons or even as signals of aggression, Pipsor added. But every other species in the Alliance has independently developed the perception that boots indicate imminent conflict. The team made another curious discovery as they examined historical reconstruction patterns following human conflicts. After each military victory, humans systematically rebuilt and upgraded infrastructure in territories they conquered, Pipsor noted. Unlike most conquering species, they fought to reconstruct, not to destroy. Kilt elaborated on this unexpected finding. What's particularly unusual is that after conflicts, humans didn't simply return to normal peaceful conditions. They actively improved living standards for the population, often building more advanced facilities than existed before the conflict. This pattern of behavior is extremely rare among conquering species. This presented the Council with a perplexing paradox. A species that always appeared combat-ready. Yet when they actually engaged in conflict, they typically improved society rather than devastating it. The second emergency session in the High Command's Alpha-level security chamber was charged with almost unbearable tension. Psychic dampening systems hummed in the background, neutralizing any attempt at telepathic interference, and the subdued lighting pulsed with a low base frequency whenever anyone's stress levels spiked above the safety threshold. The galactic leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the alert system flashed an even more alarming message. Combat indicator. Human representative altered equipment configuration. They had just received word that Attaché Reynolds had changed from his standard-issue combat boots to civilian loafers to rest his feet. The Council's reaction was immediate and severe. Switching from combat boots to civilian loafers is clearly a coded message, Quexath declared, crystal facets flashing with agitation. They're trying to misdirect us. It's a classic feint retreat strategy before launching a close-quarters attack. Raytar agreed, vehemently, teeth slightly bared. Only someone preparing for a sneak attack would deliberately reduce their equipment profile in front of a potential adversary. Mun's collective consciousness rippled with rapid analysis. There is no precedent for any species voluntarily downgrading their combat equipment while conflict risk remains elevated. This behavior indicates the highest level of deception. Security departments across the station activated the Tactical Assessment Subroutine version Omega, running 3,000 parallel algorithms to determine the human's true intentions. Time seemed to slow, as each second brought thousands of data sequences cascading through the system. Commander Thexel watched the proceedings with growing unease, wondering silently if this was the most sophisticated psychological warfare they had ever encountered. If they continued to delay, the entire Alliance would grind to a halt. If they allowed Reynolds in with his mysterious footwear change, were they risking catastrophe? After exhaustive analysis, yielded no clear answer. A direct approach was deemed necessary. A video connection was established with Attaché Reynolds in the waiting area. "Can you explain why you changed your footwear just now?" the coordinator asked carefully, trying to keep any accusation from his tone. Reynolds looked genuinely perplexed. "Oh, I just changed shoes because my feet were hurting. The combat boots are a bit tight after standing all day. These loafers are much more comfortable." Silence fell over the council chamber. Every eye focused on the screen, analyzing Reynolds' facial expressions, pupil dilation, micro-expressions, anything that might reveal deception. 10 excruciating seconds passed before Reynolds casually asked, "What about my meeting schedule? Has there been any progress with the review? Commander Thexel swallowed hard, suddenly realizing the absurdity of the situation. An entire system of over 300 civilizations had collectively misinterpreted a simple shoe change as an elaborate war strategy. All their resistance, all their analysis, had been fundamentally meaningless. Quexath slammed a crystalline appendage on the table. If it's just for comfort, we've wasted thousands of hours of analysis and delayed critical negotiations for nothing. Commander Thexel stood up, his voice solemn as he made his decision. From now on, the High Command will not delay meetings if Earth representatives wear only casual footwear. We will update our protocol accordingly. Civilian footwear, formal shoes, loafers, will receive immediate approval and priority processing. Combat boots will continue to trigger standard security assessment delays. The council chamber erupted in relieved murmurs and occasional laughter as the tension that had built over days finally dissipated. The Battle of Tebut, as it would later be called in diplomatic circles, was officially over, with the meetings back on schedule. Attaché Reynolds entered the council chamber for the third time, now wearing his comfortable loafers. Initially awkward glances from various species gradually transformed into enthusiastic engagement as the tension of the previous days dissipated. This particular session proceeded with unprecedented efficiency. Trade agreements and resource distribution treaties that normally would have required months of negotiation were finalized in a single session, breaking all records for galactic diplomacy. The Regalian delegation, initially still watching Reynolds with suspicion, couldn't help but chuckle at the resolution. So, all it takes is for humans to wear loafers for us to feel safe, one whispered to another. The Crystalline Assembly posed a formal research question for future study. Could other civilizations learn to trust humans more readily based on this experience? Or have we simply circumvented an extreme security system with a pair of shoes? The Hive Mind Collective transmitted a collective response to Commander Thexel after the session. Henceforth, we will add a footwear variable to our human assessment algorithms. This represents a significant advancement in cross-species understanding. After the successful meeting, Reynolds chatted with a fellow Earth diplomat in the corridor. Do you know why they seemed so surprised when I entered the chamber today? His colleague laughed. Somehow, you changed your shoes to ease your feet and threw the entire galaxy into chaos. I don't think they'll ever look at human footwear the same way again. Reynolds smiled. Well, that's good to know. Apparently, the fastest way to negotiate is to take off your boots. Meanwhile, Dr. Velterin and her research team were completing their analysis of the incident. Realizing that the significance of boots wasn't merely physical, they played profound psychological and historical roles that transcended species boundaries. Earth humans have elevated stability through humor to an art form, she mused to her assistants. One small detail, a pair of shoes, caused hundreds of species to stop and question their most fundamental assumptions. The High Command formally issued a universal footwear directive that would be implemented across all diplomatic channels. If Earth representatives wore combat boots, meetings would be automatically delayed for security assessment because they might be in combat mode. If Earth representatives wore casual or formal footwear, meetings would proceed immediately with priority processing because this was considered a safety signal. The story concludes as the camera pans across the courtyard of the Vorak Administrative Building, where a young Vorak child plays innocently with a toy robot model while wearing miniature combat boots. In the background, a system warning light begins to flash ominously, suggesting that the comedy, or tragedy, of cross-cultural misunderstanding would continue for generations to come. As news of the Tebut incident spread throughout diplomatic channels, reactions varied widely across species. The Arxians, a race of methane-breathing mathematicians, developed a complex algorithm to calculate the exact probability of conflict based on the specific type of human footwear. The Valorian Confederacy, always practical, simply banned all footwear in their diplomatic chambers, requiring visitors of all species to don standardized anti-static slippers. Within Earth's diplomatic corps, a quiet revolution was underway. Veteran negotiators began subtly incorporating footwear changes into their diplomatic strategies. Critical trade negotiations would begin with formal combat boots, establishing a subtle psychological pressure, before transitioning to casual loafers as agreements neared completion, signaling a de-escalation that invariably led to favorable terms. Attaché Reynolds, unaware of his role in galactic diplomatic history, continued his duties with the same unassuming efficiency. His reputation for rapid negotiation grew, though he attributed his success to straightforward communication rather than his rotating collection of increasingly comfortable footwear. 6 months after the incident, the Galactic High Command commissioned a comprehensive study on non-verbal communication across species boundaries, with an entire chapter dedicated to apparel as unintended signaling. Dr. Velterin, now heading the newly formed Department of Anthropological Diplomacy, oversaw the project with particular attention to what she termed the boot paradox. What makes humans unique, she explained to a conference of diplomatic theorists, is their capacity to unintentionally weaponize the mundane. No other species would wear battle-ready equipment to peace talks without recognizing the implicit message. Commander Thexil, having survived yet another crisis through a combination of patience and adaptability, incorporated the lessons of Taboot into the training of all diplomatic security personnel. Never assume became his mantra, that you understand the intention behind any cultural signal until you've asked directly. The Vorak filing system underwent a complete overhaul, with Protocol 77 Alpha receiving a significant update that incorporated footwear differentiation subroutines and a mandatory verbal confirmation step before triggering any security lockdowns. Kextool, recognized for her role in identifying the initial anomaly, was promoted to senior administrator, where she specialized in human diplomatic procedures. Her six-fingered dexterity proved particularly adept at cataloging the ever-expanding database of human fashion choices and their potential diplomatic implications. Bellinara accepted a position as cultural exchange coordinator, fostering direct communication between species to prevent similar misunderstandings. The greatest danger to interstellar peace, she often said, is not malice but the assumption that others perceive the world as we do. Earth's Diplomatic Academy added a mandatory course on unintentional signaling in interspecies communication, with particular emphasis on how everyday human behaviors might be interpreted by non-human civilizations. Combat boots became a case study in how cultural context could transform the mundane into the threatening. Perhaps the most profound change occurred in the Regalian approach to human negotiations. Having recognized the pattern of misinterpretation, they developed what they called inverse signal analysis, working from the assumption that human diplomatic signals often meant the opposite of what Regalian intuition suggested. Their negotiation success rates improved dramatically. The crystalline assembly took a different approach, creating detailed holographic simulations of human historical events to better understand the context behind their behaviors. These simulations revealed that, throughout Earth history, combat boots had indeed been associated with conflict, but also with protection, duty, and the restoration of order. The Hivemind Collective, with their unique capacity for parallel processing, developed a specialized subroutine dedicated solely to interpreting human, nonverbal cues. They discovered that humans unconsciously communicated through dozens of channels simultaneously: posture, tone, facial expressions, clothing choices, creating a complex symphony of meaning that other species often reduce to simplified interpretations. 1 year after the incident, when Attaché Reynolds returned to the Vorak administrative station for a follow-up negotiation, he was greeted with a formal ceremony where Commander Thexil presented him with a pair of ceremonial loafers crafted from materials representing each major civilization in the Alliance. A token of our appreciation, Thexel explained, for teaching us that understanding requires more than observation. It requires conversation. Reynolds accepted the gift with genuine confusion, but appropriate diplomatic grace. That evening, as he removed his comfortable earth-made loafers and tried on the ceremonial pair, he noticed a small inscription on the inner sole, written in the unified galactic script, in recognition of the Battle of Tebut, where no blood was shed, but great wisdom was gained. He smiled, still not fully comprehending the significance of his footwear choices, but appreciating the sentiment nonetheless. The next morning, he wore the ceremonial loafers to the negotiation session, unaware that sensors throughout the station were logging his footwear and automatically clearing his path through every security checkpoint. The trade agreement that had been projected to require 3 months of careful negotiation was completed before lunch. As Reynolds departed the station, Dr. Velterin watched from an observation deck, recording final notes for her ongoing research. Perhaps, she mused to Pipsor, the true lesson of Tebut is that peace isn't achieved through perfect understanding, but through the willingness to acknowledge our misunderstandings and adapt accordingly. Pipsor nodded thoughtfully. Or perhaps it's simply that when dealing with humans, we should always check their feet first. They laughed together, watching Reynolds' ship depart, while in the administrative offices below. Kextool was already updating the protocol once again. The newest version included a special exception for ceremonial footwear, ensuring that the galaxy would never again be thrown into crisis by a simple pair of shoes. Or so they hoped. In the courtyard below, the young Vorak child continued playing with toy soldiers, all wearing miniature combat boots, blissfully unaware that their game was triggering minor security alerts throughout the station. A junior security officer watched with amusement, having been briefed on the Tebut incident during orientation. Sometimes, the officer thought, the greatest threats to peace aren't weapons or armies, but the assumptions we make about each other. As night fell on the Vorak administrative station, the stars visible through the transparent walls seemed to twinkle with cosmic amusement, as if the universe itself appreciated the irony that after thousands of years of technological advancement and diplomatic protocol development, interstellar peace might ultimately depend on something as simple as a comfortable pair of shoes.